Hello, beautiful people. I hope everyone is doing very well this evening. Hopefully everyone can hear me fine. I hope that that is the case. Perhaps there are even some people coming over from AA's crew. I think I see Apostolic Majesty. I see the agent himself, all kinds of people in the house. Welcome, one and all. Let me get through the shilling very quickly. I'll be sharing some thoughts on a variety of things that have been in my addlepated brain space. And later in a bit, I will be taking questions and that sort of thing. I realize it has been quite some time since I've done a live stream. The exigencies of circumstance have intervened in any number of ways in my affairs. And so I trust you will all bear with me. So first thing, please follow this channel, Semiagog, as well as a Safer Space, which has a bunch of old material from when I was briefly shut down over on the Semiagog side. You can do that on YouTube. You can also follow both channels over on BitChute, God help you, since a lot of that material just simply doesn't load. You just sit there and it spins forever. I guess it's a feature, not a bug. And then there is Odyssey, where things are going very well indeed. So yeah, please follow me over on Odyssey, because that seems to be the platform of the future. Also, Telegram. There are all kinds of people over there you cannot find elsewhere. Like, well, I mean, relative to Twitter, I should say. Morgoth, Woes, Frody's doing things over there. Academic Agent is now over there. You can find him under Birdie Bassett. So please do that. I'm on Minds and Gab as well. And speaking of Twitter and social media, a part of AA's crew who has come to be known as Phil Collins, just had a direct quote from his Twitter account, one of his recent tweets from today that was actually quite fucking good. Just got read on air by Tucker Carlson, so that was a trip. Go Phil Collins. Yes, again, a member of AA's crew, a star in his own right, as this evening shows, Oren McIntyre. You can follow his channel here on YouTube as well. Please buy my sci-fi book. This is Vinculum. It's set in a dystopian future in the year 2076 in Istanbul. There's a book thief named Alaric McBroom who is pursued by remorseless corporate hitmen and an esoteric sect of assassins. You can find that on Amazon, and you will see the link for that in the description below. And then there is my book of poetry. I realize that there will be few people and far between who will be interested in such things, but it's called Cinders, From the Bloomery of Youth, and that's under the name Oliver Timken Perrin. You can find that over on Amazon. So yeah. Oh, I got a gift in the mail before I closed down my P.O. box. My P.O. box is now closed as of the end of this month because I am preparing to move. This is one of the things that is what I mentioned before, the exigencies of circumstance. For that reason also, I will not be able to attend the event that is coming up in Tennessee. I'm sad that I will not be able to. I definitely still recommend the event. It's a number of people from AA's crew, a number of folks from stateside. Turnip is going to be going. Academic Agent will be appearing as some sort of imperial hologram. Who else is in it? Charlemagne is in there. Distributist is coming. There's a bunch of people who are going to be showing up. There's more than that. And so I definitely recommend the event. Let me just pull that up so I can tell you the right URL. I'll stick it in the chat here. Yeah, let me just pull it like this. Hopefully it will not disappear from the chat. There it is. All right, skildings.com. So yeah, I am sorry that I will not be able to make it. My apologies, but there's no way around it for me at present. So, and it's a month out still from the event. So, you know, forgive me, but it's a month lead time, and I don't like to do this sort of thing, but I'm not going to be able to make it. So thanks for the package that came in the mail. It was a person who kindly sent me a money clip, which is right on, and it had some folding money in it in remembrance of my late friend Tim. So thank you very much. So yeah, allow me to pour myself some chocolate milk, and we will get into whatever these thoughts of mine are. Some bear on the UO Hopefully you guys can still hear me since I'm away from the microphone. It also occurs to me belatedly that I can remove these headphones, which will make it easier to drink. Sorry, this isn't the fast pace and thrilling action of a UO episode. So yeah, let me just kill these. So yeah, what do I have to talk about this evening? Well, several things. If we have time to get into it, and if my brain begins to work more properly, I haven't live streamed in so long that I feel like there's cobwebs in the attic, and it's a bad enough situation as it stands. Just my brain operating under normal circumstances. I may get in a little bit into what I'm looking at with Marxist linguistics. A lot of people talk about cultural Marxism, and I think it's worth underscoring the fact that Gramsci, who is, lies upstream from so many of the things that we're all, enjoying the fruits of at present, he was first trained as a linguist. And I think that is something that more thought should be given to, and it dovetails in with my work. Actually, some of the things that I wanted to talk about at the upcoming event, and I'm now not going to be able to, but I'm still working on putting it in book form. And it may come out in parts. It'll doubtless come out in parts. Who am I lying to? And in video clips. So maybe we'll talk a bit about that. But there, are a few things that are interesting going on in my life. I mean, other than the nonsense of not being able to do anything these days. All our systems are so screwed. They're so ass backwards at present that just getting normal things done is a nightmare. I imagine many of you guys have seen the thing of trying to call a company where once, say, 2 years ago, you could have called and gotten someone on the phone. You could have raised a human being. Now, you might have to navigate through the nonsense of these automated systems in which you speak to the recorded voices of, the equivalent of telephone bots. But now there are many places where you call and nobody answers. There is no human being. And what's cool, is that you let the telephone ring for a very long time, and eventually at the end, you get a message. And it says, there is no one available to take your call, or something of this sort. Like, literally, that's it. It's not like call back tomorrow. It's not like leave a message. It's not like try this other number. You simply can no longer raise humans. It's like I put in a poem of mine. Out of the many comes the none, right? Everything is a message that's been lost in the post. It's really straight out of Terry Gilliam's film Brazil. It opens, of course, with the guy who's Archibald Buttle or Tuttle, I can't remember, but like a bug goes crawling through the ticker tape machine and suddenly it reads Buttle instead of Tuttle or Tuttle instead of Buttle. It's that same sort of freakish triumph of the clerk where, lurking around every corner is a resentful scrivener, like something out of that, the Bartleby tale. It's just, it's all horrifying. It's the telephone messages. I had to call the IRS about some tax related stuff. There's no one to speak to. It's not even like the old days where you would wait for, 4 hours on hold, literally 2-3 hours on hold. And then eventually you would speak to a harried person who was deeply inefficient. No, in this case, there's simply no one to talk to. No one. And this comes down to things that matter in our lives. I see somebody mentioned call centers, abroad. I should be so lucky as to speak to a Filipino or something. But no, there's simply no one to reach. And meanwhile, the fucking continues. And I've talked to friends who are having trouble, they have to throw their whole life into chaos because they can no longer bus their children to school. These are the same schools that are now doing basic, and I'm not reading about this, it's a friend of mine telling me about it, doing basic sex education for children at age 5, and talking about things like having 2 mommies and 2 daddies. And of course, if you in any way try to pull them out of that program, assuming you're not in some homeschooling program, you get reported. You go on to lists for being people who, are not doing the right things with their kids. Yeah, because apparently they're not your kids. They're not our kids. Not that I have kids. Yeah, but I think the point stands, doesn't it? Everything's kind of breaking down. We've got the business with the inflation that they're finally starting to acknowledge. We got the supply chain issues and the rest. It just, I had to call it utility companies because the post office is not delivering my mail regularly. And I'm one of these like cantankerous characters that wants to have my bills mailed to me. If someone wants me to move all my finances online, my response is, politely, fuck you very much. No. I'll go to the bank and take out cash and, or mail checks or whatever. I don't want your ATM machines. I don't want your credit cards. I don't want your bullshit. Just send me the shit in an envelope. But it doesn't come anymore. And what's so strange about that is that's happening at precisely the time that everything else is being driven online. It must be a coincidence that the United States Postal Service, when it's not being used to fortify elections, is being allowed to just dwindle into nothing. It's freakish. So yeah, I've been calling a number of these bill companies because I'm like, I didn't get a damn bill, and I'm not going to take care of it online. No, I'm going to call them up. And the phone systems now, like in the first 2 or 3 choices that you get, you have basically speak to someone about making a payment, and then there's like debt and collections and things. So it's not going well. Like there are all kinds of little signs behind the scenes, and in the background that, people of a less bougie background than myself are probably well aware of. Even with me, my shit's crumbling here in this situation. There are a number of signs for the better. Another thing that's been taking up my time is a project that's come in. Well, hopefully, we just pitched it. So perhaps I can make some shekels. That would be nice. That would be very nice indeed. So yeah, all kinds of crazy Brazil shit going on in the background. So, it's very interesting to put that as a context for everything else, hearing about what's going on recently in Kazakhstan, the craziness in Belarus, the continuing kind of crackdowns going on in the European Union, Australia. I don't even, I kind of feel like, Alabama and Mississippi, right? Like no matter how much shit Alabama gets, and that can be Australia in this metaphor, they can always talk shit about Mississippi. In this case, I guess Australia could at least say it could be worse. We could have Ardern or whatever. I don't know though, man, depending on the region of Australia. So you've got all this crazy lockdown crap, and then you have this business with the United States and the United Kingdom seeming to begin to back off on this. And I bring part of this up because, I'm rolling straight over here from having listened to the crew over on Unpopular Opinions. And, they were talking about the COOF vax situation over there. And, man, I simply cannot just dismiss the fact, because, we were all there, but call it to your minds, though it seems as though it was so long ago. Call it to your minds back there in 2015, Brexit ramping up. Everybody's like looking at the polling and what the figures looks like and how it seems like it's going to go. And, Trump is at that moment just a sparkle in his daddy's eye. And then this weird thing happens with Brexit, and following close on its heels is this whole thing with Trump. And it's like, wow, I was on the train. I was riding the Trump train, and I have eaten my crow publicly. So yeah, I'll acknowledge that yet again. But nevertheless, in some ways, I am unrepentant and recalcitrant, because there's something in all of this with Boris just turning around out of nowhere. And, I heard a little bit of this stuff where I think he was in the House of Commons or whatever, making all these announcements, and people would cheer in the background, eliciting puking noises in the background from D. But it's odd that that's happening at the same time that, Biden is more or less saying, well, there's not much we can do about it. And the Supreme Court, ruled against, I believe, the OSHA thing. And I just saw another thing that happened today or another announcement about OSHA backing off. And in a lot of these states, it looks like it's beginning to, quite a bit of it is falling apart. Not that they're not going to wring it for everything they can get out of it. And the mania will continue. But there's something going on with the UK and the United States sort of doing this sort of turnaround. To some extent, I think you're dealing with the simple fact that there's some of this that they can no longer, they just, reality is scratching at the door. And there's a certain amount of, that they can stall, and they can print more money, and they can run off with, massive sacks of cash, rolling around grinning atop their dragon heaps of gold and this sort of thing. But that can only be put off for so long. And even if you've got sort of the higher managers talking to the lower managers, telling them what to do, there's only a certain amount of that can be sustained when the system gets put under more and more pressure, right? People will back up so as to separate themselves and not be held responsible. The ones that they've left sitting there like stool pigeons are going to be taking the heat. Even with a group of elites who have a certain amount of power to influence that system where, the higher level managers are, go their merry way with their sacks of gold, and the other ones are left to take the shit for it. There's only a certain amount of that can go. I think at the same time, there's a basic economics, there's the supply chain stuff, there's the general sense of hysteria, but there's also plenty coming out about the illness and about the vaccines. They couldn't cork it fully. I've done a wonderful job in making all this horror show happen, but I think that there are limits to how much of that they can take. And yet in other countries, they're not really worrying about it as much. Maybe they are. I mean, Italy did something I saw where they're putting together a fund for people who have had issues with the vaccine. And I haven't followed the European side of things as closely, but things are falling apart. You could say that they want to distance themselves at this point, but as was pointed out in UO, they're still blowing and going, full steam ahead with things in Europe. Well, it's a mixed bag, and it still looks pretty bad. So what's up with the United States and the United Kingdom in a way that really reminds me of 2015 and 2016 suddenly being the ones to kind of, create some distance. Now, there's a bunch of stupid shit. Like I heard Boris Johnson, he was saying, well, now we still recommend that you wear masks, because, if you come across someone that you don't normally see. And I'm thinking to myself, what the fuck does that have to do with viral transmission? The airborne transmission of a respiratory virus. Well, you haven't seen this person before, so put your mask on, because you can't catch it from anyone you interact with regularly. It's just, it's harebrained shit. However, the general idea is backing off and saying that we're not going to require this anymore. Maybe it's pressure. Maybe pressure has something to do with it from the economic side. Maybe it's concern about things that may be coming down the pike in terms of liability, though what form that would take. I mean, since most of these governments signed off and said that they couldn't come after the pharmaceutical companies for problems because they're doing it under emergency authorization. So, presumably the one remaining thing that could be a problem for people is, electoral problems, to whatever extent that matters anymore. It's just like call another whore out of the stable, I reckon. But there's just something that stands out about this idea of the UK and the US, because we're not seeing it with New Zealand. And I think it's fair to say that if you are going to see a place where you could reasonably argue that there's some degree of Chinese capture going on, New Zealand, I think, would at least be, not that there aren't other pressures on it, and not that the gay doesn't have its reach, but you could probably say that's going on there in New Zealand, I'd guess. And I really do feel that there's a certain amount of it going on in Australia too. I know for sure it's going on in Canada, big time. So the UK, it doesn't seem to be moving, or how do I say this? The former Commonwealth countries don't seem to be moving with the UK, which would make sense if there is as much globo homo and Chinese influence in those places as one would imagine. But the UK and the United States seem to have something of a parallel course. And it's way too early to make a call on this, and I've been wrong before, so, feel free to throw your cabbages and shit. But there's something about this that smacks of 2015, 2016, and I just kind of feel it. Then again, maybe it's what I'm drinking. There was also some talk about who was in charge that was just going on with the AA thing. And I want to dip my toe into that. I'm just going to catch hell about it, be told I'm wearing tinfoil hats and stuff. But I want to at least take a take a look at it in terms of what this picture is and how things are breaking down the way they are, or the way in which the different parts of the structure seem to be reorganizing it in different ways relative to others. Some of that could be construed as beating a hasty retreat because they got what they wanted. Some of it that it could be crumbling. Other ones because they're going to catch hell based on their responsibility for decisions that had been made across this 2-year period. I don't know. But before I get to that, I do want to say if you guys have questions for me, save them until I get through this part and plug them in there with like an @semiagog or something in them. But I'm not going to see them for now because at this point I'm just trying to keep up with not sputtering without any kind of thread tying it all together. I mean that's always halfway the case. So here's my pop-out chat. Yeah, so I will be able to see it with the if you put an @semiagog at the beginning of it, but save it until until I get further along. When I'm done with this part with these various things I'm talking about, so I can actually track the chat and respond. So yeah, this thing of who's in charge. I've talked about it before as like blue commies and red commies. I get that they're not commies in all cases. I get that there's all kinds of ways in which the corporate is overlapping with the government or superseding it. How you have like onion layers, and yes, it'll make you cry if you start peeling them back. But I'll call them commies because that's the best quick shorthand for utopians who are big into social engineering. And I've always sort of thought about the blue commies, which seems to be the EU, and it seems to be, the UN. Now, they're dividing lines between these groups, but I think that they overlap to a large extent. The EU, the UN commie stuff that was set up, and certainly the preponderance of the sort of deep state apparatus in the United States. It seems to me really that, your Joe Biden's, your Angela Merkel's, your Justin Trudeau's, Jacinda Ardern, this crew, and not just like quote unquote lefty people too. Your Theresa May, your all the Lincoln Project type people, and your Harvard and your Yale. All of that seems to be the blue commies, where they like literally. I think somebody sat down sometime saying, we get called reds all the time. Let's just change it to blue, so we seem to be the opposite of that. I swear to God, it's dialectics. I mean, what could be more obvious than red and blue, and then like Clinton trying to show up with her purple, royal colors, thesis, synthesis, antithesis, synthesis, and all this kind of crap. They really do worship the dialectic. The more I look into their material, that is the beating heart of their mysticism. They really do believe within their historical processes that everything undergoes this perpetual system of transmogrification that they call progress. But this crew seems more or less interchangeable. They've got a whole bunch of CIA flavors on them, depending on what level of that you want to talk about. They've got a whole bunch of the UN, your Alger Hiss type people. Like I said, the new crew that has been installed in the so-called educational institutions to push these variations on cultural Marxism with heavy Frankfurt School overlays of race, to break through the false consciousness and convince these subaltern parties that they're being oppressed. And they have nothing to lose, clearly, but they're chains. Those are kind of the blue commies. And there are definitely fissures within the, different European states like the French and the Germans and the rest. But where it counts, they tend to work together. We'll see what happens with this business with Ukraine, where I agree with everything AA summarized and my own stuff I'm preparing, because I'm going to talk to JF on Thursday about Ukraine. It really doesn't look at this point like there's going to be war. But to stay for now on this subject of these different groups, then you've got the Chinese. And I call them the red commies. I understand that they've transformed heavily, that they've absorbed all kinds of features and functions of the nations with which they interact, for which they have to create interfaces in order to engage their gears with the gears of these other systems. But because there is Mao in the background, and, you know, at the heart of Mao was, you know, a study of things such as the Tao. And the Tao actually has a goddamn yin yang with a black and a white swirling around each other. And in the seed of the black is the white, and the seed of the white is the black. Like, I mean, if there's anything ready for, you know, the Venn diagram overlap for the operation of reductionist syncretism, the yin yang at the heart of the Tao, which is one of the things that Mao studied, and dialectical materialism, you know, they have their ways in which they seem to coincide neatly. And so I see the dialectic there at the whole heart of aspects of that culture. Confucianism is something else, but Confucianism dovetails perfectly because it mandates mandarins, a massive, you know, towering edifice of bureaucratic scribes, which fits well for the whole, you know, central planning organization. It's the same kind of crap you get out of Brussels. They're different flavors of this utopian central planned thing that has aspects of socialism, of fascism, in the sense that they like to talk about the overlap between the corporations and the state. So red commies, blue commies. And then what's interesting is the red, I think, overlap heavily with the blue. I think that a lot of the changes that are happening with the blue commies have to do with subversive money coming out of China shaping those organizations. And if you start to take a look at the Chinese people who are on boards of corporations and the way, you know, behind the curtain that's all operating, you know, there's for me, it seems increasingly important to recognize that depending on the level of analysis, how granular you want to get, nations are fictions that are, you know, are of greater or lesser usefulness. So China is definitely a nation because it has a strong military to back it up, economic power, territory. Russia is certainly a real nation. The United States is still a real nation. I mean, as far as anything is real these days. But like when people talk about the gay, obviously the United States is not necessarily in control of that. People will argue with me about it. I recognize other people have different opinions. But in my view, the United States was captured and was intended to be the policeman that replaced Britain, which is why, you know, when Britain lost Diego Garcia, we gained it. You know, when the British Navy sort of stopped being the world standard with the most control, ours became it, right? But it doesn't really mean it's American. Now, people will argue about who's behind the scenes with that. But yeah, so then you've got a block of technocrats and they've come up and they've accrued new power to themselves. And they've clearly made a case for themselves. Though in the background, they were funded, man. I remember when Google appeared, man. People who weren't alive at the time, when Google appeared, everything else was falling to shit. Or at least when it really picked up and started to rise and take a position. All the other search engines were getting hammered, like, you know, Ask Jeeves and what was the other one? Alta Vista. Like all those things had been hit by the .bomb, the .com problems. You know, for those who are old enough to remember Y2K, Google just got tons and tons and tons and tons of money pumped into it and just became the center of everything. So I don't think that the technocrats are their own block either, right? Like all these things crisscross. But then you have this idea of the people who are in control at the top who are really telling people what to do, but from the background. That's the place where power is power and money is just an index for it. And they can get things rolling in their own way with very few actual steps. They can indicate how things are going to flow by signaling quite clearly that, like AA was talking about, and it's a similar thing. You can just trot out the Dark Lord and have him chide people for failing to conform entirely to the roadmap as it's been laid out. And for those who didn't get it, you know, he'll go over the clear points that, you know, that everybody should bear in mind. But there are many ways in which that old saying, to shift the course of a mighty river, it's enough to, flip a small pebble as long as you do it far enough upstream. And there are these higher level elites who are having the lackeys who are in there because of bio-Leninism. Maybe they're in there because they simply required having a dipshit who's foolish enough to be left holding the bag for whatever it is they're going to do. That used to be a big thing with like a Cheney type Republican administration would come in and just gut everything, but they'd have it set so that the public didn't become aware of it until the next Democratic administration came in, and it would look like they were holding it. Now, of course, it didn't help that the Democrats were more than ready to move on and do even more stupid shit and crooked shit. But what I'm trying to get at is that there's a tension between this upper layer that's making things happen by flipping tiny pebbles far enough upstream, and then there are those who are going to be left holding the bag for it. So I think these multiple strands that all intertwine across these different dimensions have to do with what we're seeing in terms of the different levels of response. Like, I'm sure that many people moved the whole COOF strategy forward because the crowds are feminine, as was famously observed by, I think, Le Bon, and it's been attributed to a certain vegetarian painter. I think somebody told me they looked into it and couldn't find that exact quote anywhere. But but there are others who have made it happen, and that brings the subject up of a certain person whom I won't name, because I no longer see fit to. But he's really, really big on talking about emergent systems. And you've got, I realize I'm winding all over the place, but I said I'd ramble for a while and we'd take questions. And I qualified all of this only as being, I'll talk a bit about what's going on. And this loosely fits into that. This whole thing with emergent systems, this person whom I have in mind is not the only one that likes to talk about emergent systems. And I guess in a certain way, what we're talking about here is, let me find this meme, because this all bears on the idea of people moving behind the scenes and the idea of who is behind this. Remember, that was the tangent that I just took here, talking about the UO stream and the people who might be in charge of things and the kind of speculation that was going on related to that. Let me see if I can pull this meme up. Just give me the option to do it with a window. Oh yeah, I have to actually make the window come up. Hang on, ladies and gents, sorry. I should get this sorted out. I'm only slightly a boomer. All right. So yeah, this is just a dumb meme I put together because I was constantly, wherever I look, anywhere on social media, you constantly see people attributing to ignorance what can most parsimoniously be explained as being motivated by malice. So, like, one of them that I just saw recently was this guy, Jay Inslee. He's the governor of Washington State in the U.S., and he wants to make it illegal to talk about voting irregularities because this might lead to violence. And you'll see all these tweets appear, and all the sort of quote-unquote center-right people will show up, and they start saying, oh my God, he's so incompetent. He doesn't even understand the First Amendment. And I'm like, like what? Like what? Or Sotomayor gets up there and starts talking about how she wants to make the vaccine mandatory, and then she just starts quoting endless streams of bullshit figures about, for example, the number of children who've been affected in various ways in these sorts of things. And so what happens is everybody likes to frame that as being, something that can be, explained by them being ignorant and incompetent. So that's one of these things that I really wanted to talk about as a little parentheses in the midst of discussing who's in charge of this. Because this fits in with the idea of emergent behavior. It's just a property of a system, and the emergent properties are those that stand apart from these others that operate in concert to generate them. It's something that just sort of happens. Now, there is a place for, these theories about emergence within systems. Absolutely. And there are things for which they provide useful explanatory models. But at the end of the day, as they like to say, you've got it really all boils down to it being little more than them saying, it just happens. Shit just happens. Nobody's doing this. It's never that someone's doing it. It's always just an emergent property, or it's because you have incompetent people in office. It's they can talk about the schools these days are just terrible at what they do. They don't educate people, and I'm like, motherfucker, do you not realize that they perfectly perform their function? They're rollicking success stories, much like all of these crooked politicians. Who they're all crooked as a dog's hind leg. And everybody wants to explain it away as being ignorance or ineptitude. I see people doing this constantly. And in doing so, they literally provide cover. They provide cover under color of criticism. It's a really, really clever technique. They can make fun of governors like Inslee or people like Sotomayor. They just don't understand. And there's something here I want to mention, which is, Morgoth's thing about the hatchling and the strategy of pretending ignorance. Well, I kind of want to call it, this should be an extension of that, or I want to call it like the reverse hatchling, right? It's attributing ignorance to the enemy as a way of providing cover for them so that their activities cannot be seen as evil. It's like, oh, they just didn't know any better. They must have just hatched yesterday. He's not trying to remove, the right to free speech under the First Amendment. No, he's so dumb. He doesn't know what the First Amendment is. And I really think that we should mean this to death. It should just not be accepted any longer anywhere. Wherever you come across it, it should be slapped back into its seat. I mean that. Wherever it is encountered, online, face-to-face conversations, shut it down. So the point here is when they can't go for emergence, they go for incompetence. These things are kind of tied together. Emergence is one. Oh, it's just a property of complex systems. And, you take a look at emergence. Let me kill this here and I'll bring myself back. Emergence absolutely has places where, or the basic ideas that surround it, there are definitely places where it applies. But I'm just going to go ahead and pull some stuff up, right? They have this idea. Let's make sure that this is very, very clear. They talk about... this is just Wikipedia crap, so I'm not claiming that it's going to be, the standard for those who are deeply into such things, but it is sufficient to get our heads basically around the idea. So, philosophers often understand emergence as a claim about the etiology of a system's properties. An emergent property of a system, in this context, is one that is not a property of any component of that system, but is still a feature of the system as a whole. And it's not a new idea, and it is an interesting idea, and it gets used extensively in modeling, which apparently has to do with what they conceive of as a weak emergence. Now, again, this is just one take on it. There are many, and I'm probably going to have holes that anybody who is a master of this subject matter would come in and slap around. But in general terms, I believe this view of it is adequate. So they talk about like a weak emergence being a type of emergence in which the emergent property is amenable to computer simulation or similar forms after the fact analysis. So they talk here about formations of traffic jams, the structure of a flock of starlings, and they also formation of galaxies, whatever. But they're also looking at a lot of things like how locusts operate as a group, because there's a whole god-awful, enormous defense budgets going into how to get swarms of drones to operate autonomously. And so, you can see the fruits of that, for example, at like big national events, like the Chinese, I believe, did some stuff with drones, and they show how they can operate and, array themselves in space. But there are huge defense applications, which is driving a lot, at least at present, accounts for a lot of the interest in this type of thinking. But the issue with this, let me find my little notes again because I want to make sure I don't get too derailed. You guys know I'm already deeply challenged. Come on now. Is this the one I wanted? Yes. This whole basic idea of it comes out of computer modeling, or at least one of the major applications of the theory is in the domain of computer modeling. As I said, they've got an interest there. And this allows people to predict or, forensically to try to figure out what's going on and to simulate. But it gets on my nerves when Emergence is pitched as a way to understand all this. And it's not just for the unnamed person that I mentioned, the unnamed person that I didn't mention. It's also Jordan B. Peterson. He's all about the idea that there's not a conspiracy. It's just something that happens. Now, he doesn't, that I've heard, make a practice generally of going around attributing it to emergence. But it's, again, this idea that it's something that happens, and it's something that happens because of all these features. Perhaps it's structural, but it's a property of the interrelationship of these elements in these systems. And Moldbug riffs on this all the time too. And to a considerable extent, it seems to be the price of entry. The price of entry for even getting circulation at the relative fringes of the discourse is that you must genuflect upon entrance by indicating that you will not tolerate the idea that there is a conspiracy of any kind. And as my friend Tim put it, and everybody should remember this, only the poor conspire. The rich simply make plans. Only the poor conspire. A conspiracy means somebody planned something. And so anyone who would say that there's, you can't tackle this problem by, using elite theory is essentially saying that it's absurd of you to imagine that what happens around us could be the result of plans. Now, I'm sure there's some way to come at this in which, in a theoretical model of convergence to account for the facts that we see before us, there's a way in which you could still see the plans happening, and yet they would be gathered up in the maelstrom of these chaotic elements that are, not a lack of order, but in fact an order beyond our current understanding. The bottom line is people make plans, and it has an enormous influence on our lives, and it has always been the case. This is a perennial truth. So, I tend to discount this idea of emergence. And again, it gets used as a gatekeeping tool, it seems. So, you've got this idea to predict or simulate, but predicting and simulation, they're a product of limited understanding. That's not the same thing as comprehension. Limited understanding is all that is required to instrumentalize something. Comprehension is something very, very different. I mean, if anybody doubts that, I can point out that we had primitive firearms long for centuries, or at least a century or two. For centuries before we ever had ballistics tables. Before anybody started talking about a ballistic coefficient, right? Limited understanding is not the same thing as comprehension. So to whatever degree that we can model something using these various systems theories, limited understanding that permits of simulation and prediction to a certain extent, that is not the same thing as truly understanding it. It's not the be-all, end-all of trying to account for what we see before us. And even if we leave all of that aside, there is no sense in which a model of what's happening can be considered an equivalent to an explanation, at least not necessarily. To say that we have a model of what's happening doesn't mean that we can explain it. I mean, look at climate models. Look at the COVID models. These are all these complex systems that, or the idea of emergence, or how the millions of human vectors across the globe, combined with the airlines and the ductwork inside every hotel that has X number of people and crowds milling in the street. They're going to put together a model to account for what's going on with this business of the coof. And look at the ones that came out of Imperial College or whatever. Look at the ones that get used in the stock market. And yet, I'll guarantee you behind the scenes, people are making decisions that shape that world entirely. Or at least within parameters that make, that make it worthless to even argue over the less important aspects of it. I'm not speaking well. My vocabulary is escaping me. Clearly this is working. So perhaps I don't understand the idea of emergence entirely, because I'm still not clear on what this new order of system that emerges, that is a whole greater than the sum of its parts. I'm not quite clear on what that is and how it would explain all this. But basically emergence comes down to the idea that, how did I put it? It's a place for someone who wants to say conspiracies are not a factor. It's simply a place for them to stand. They need a place to stand while they point to you and go, that's ridiculous. It's emergence, or, these other accounts that are just like, oh, it's just something that happens. I am of the old school. Think of me as a traditionalist. I still think that powerful human beings can plan things. Now, the best laid plans of mice and men. Sometimes it doesn't work out and the systems are complex. And, we don't need someone with a computer science background to tell us that, since, the days of One-Eyed Philip or Subutai. People have known that when you unleash war, there is a great randomness that stalks across the scene, blowing its bone flute to call the dogs of war and famine and cities destroyed by fire. If you're going to unleash that, then, sometimes it can get out of hand, and we've always known that. However, likewise, we have always known that human beings plan things, and they are the causes behind the scenes in many, many cases. So not saying that emergence and an emergence gloss can't have value and that it always doesn't have value. It does have a place, but it's amid a range of explanatory or predictive models. So, yeah. Now, the interesting thing here is that when they can't do emergence, they go for incompetence, which brings us back to this idea of people behind the scenes. And I guess where I wanted to get, it's very complicated. Just with the limited amount that I've been able to come up with some way to construe it in my mind, it's complicated, sure. And it would be cool to have tools to look at complex systems, but they would have to account for the fact that human beings actually do make decisions. You got some red commies, you got some blue commies, you've got the way in which, for example, Chinese businessmen who have large amounts of money and are put on the boards of companies, likewise Brits, likewise Turks, like when they brought the Turk over and made him the CEO of Coca-Cola for a while, when they brought the Indian woman over and made her the CEO of Pepsi for a while. They circulate the international elites at the top to make sure that they have experience with these big corporations, but at the same time they have a certain amount of control there. So not only do you have the blue commies and the red commies and the energy companies and whatever form the Seven Sisters are currently in, you've also got all this stuff going on economically behind the scenes. And then you've got a layer of people who are capable of planning beyond a 3 to 5 year exit strategy, some of whom actually play the great game. I guarantee you the Chinese do. They're not just looking at 3 to 5 years. They're looking at much longer spans of time, because people who can operate in that space, it's like the old line, the slow blade penetrates the shield. Or another concept that I've tapped on before and everybody should look into is this one of flicker fusion threshold. The point at which the rate at which a series of images have to flash, at least for the human eye, in order to form an image that seems to be seamless. But if your flicker fusion threshold is different, they will disaggregate, almost like when you're watching a Nickelodeon spinning and it hits a certain speed and it just starts to become something other than that continuous movement. It starts to enter this interzone between the continuous image that seems to be animated and its constituent frames. There are ways of looking at this. Yeah, the slow blade penetrates the shield. And when they operate at a scale that spans time much more broadly, You can't even see it. There are certain animals that get stalked, and the predator simply moves slowly enough that it doesn't trip their alarm threshold. Next thing you know, it gets swallowed. I think there is quite a bit of that going on. So yeah, I think we should drop the idea of nations as always being important. If they've got a big military, you can still think of China as a nation, but it's interpenetrated. You know, the Venn diagrams overlap all over the place. It's interpenetrated the UN structures, the European structures. It's penetrated the damn Chinese, the Canadian government, certainly the New Zealand government, probably considerable portions of the Australian one. It's all over the place in the U.S. The U.S. has done this through its NGOs in different countries around the world. To whatever extent the EU and UN people can foster money that didn't just come from the U.S., they try to do it. Red commies, blue commies, it's a mess. So, what else did I want to talk about? Yeah, I just wanted to wrap this. I just felt like rambling about that. Thank you for indulging me. However, I do think that we have to hammer on this idea of it's not malice, it's not corruption, it's incompetence. So I'm working on this idea. It's spin competence. So feel free to use spin competence. AKA the reverse hatchling. So yeah, spin competence is to provide cover. You know, when they can't go for emergence, they go for incompetence. And attributions of incompetence are always cover. So yeah, whenever you see that out there where somebody from the center right is rolling in, or you know, the center right is rolling in and talking, I can't believe how incompetent they are, nail them for it. Don't let them do it. It's so nefarious and cunning to provide cover. It's kind of like that thing. It's a reverse damned by faint praise, right? It's if you took damned by faint praise, which I think is a Samuel Clemens Mark Twain thing. It's almost as though you're praised by faint criticism, right? It's cover. You're providing cover for them. If you do that, don't let other people do it around you. Recognize it. Spin competence, the reverse hatchling, attributing to incompetence what can most be most parsimoniously explained as malice and corruption. All right. So, what else did I have that I was going to cover here? Yeah, it's this. I guess I'll talk about it for a minute, and then how long have I coming up to an hour? Yeah, I'll talk about this for a minute because I'm still working on it. And then I guess I'll just turn it over for questions because I'm not going to go all night. But I am going to pour myself some more chocolate milk. So, everybody knows about cultural Marxism. Politics is downstream from culture, all this other stuff. Everybody knows that the Frankfurt School picked up Gramsci's work. Excuse me. People like Marcuse got hauled out of where they were in Germany. They were not first funded by the CIA. They had very wealthy backers who came in and set up the Frankfurt School. The Frankfurt School wasn't just a group of friends. They had been plugged into a situation where they had institutional backing, and then they gained the attention of these spooky spooks who then brought them over to the U.S. and put them to work creating these frameworks for subversion. And everybody knows, or not everybody, but most people know, hell, even I knew, that that this genteel fellow Gramsci was in the background. You know, he got into trouble. He was first trained as a linguist at school and studied Italian linguistics, people like Croce and others. And he was familiar with the neo-grammarians, and he was familiar with Saussure, of course. He worked as a journalist. He was a some kind of grand poobah for the Italian Communist Party. As I recall, he ran afoul of Mussolini, got stuck in prison, famously wrote his prison notebooks. And I had been certainly aware of cultural Marxism. I had been aware of the name Gramsci, you know, lying behind these other figures like Marcuse. And I was familiar with the focus on language because I had been around for the I just got distracted because I saw a reference from from Academic Agent about him reading Mosca as well, which makes sense. I was aware of the focus on language because I had been around for the 1990s when the first wave of political correctness came in. I mean, it got hammered hard in like 89, 90, 91. A lot of you guys weren't around or weren't paying attention to such things at that time. But that's when like Wind Shuttle, I believe, who's an Australian history guy, wrote The Killing of History, lamenting the way in which history programs were being destroyed in colleges and universities. Martin Bernal came out with his Black Athena bullshit. It was all over the place. The whole thing of differently abled people of color replacing blacks and all that stuff came in hardcore in the 90s. And it was real stuff. And it was mocked for a while, and then it sort of subsided. But it was like one of those things where, it just retreated to gather its strength and multiply behind the, to swarm verminously behind the floorboards, under the floorboards, behind the cabinets. Yeah. And it just erupted into our lives here with this whole wonderful roller coaster ride we've been on for so long now. So I was aware of that going on with language, and I'd given it thought. And, there's some stuff that gets passed around. You guys can probably go find it if you want to look for just, 10 minutes or whatever. There's stuff from the 1950s, as I recall, about political correctness, and people are aware of that as, sort of a communist idea, literally communist from communist regimes, political correctness. And a bunch of the, communists or socialists came in with the UN and talked about hate speech and, the policing of language and the rest. But I had never tied that to Gramsci because I had not dug deeply enough into it. And, people talk about politics being downstream from culture and the rest, and they attribute that to Gramsci and his shift of strategy. For those who don't know, basically everybody was sitting there going, what the fuck happened? The revolution was supposed to go off without a hitch because of the inherent tensions and the nature of the system. And Papa Marx told us it was going to work out. Well, how come when we seized control, we encountered all this resistance? And in many cases, we didn't get what we want. And even when we did get what we want, we only got it because we stuck the bayonet in and we felt mush and we kept pushing, right? So Gramsci is one of the people who attempts to figure this out. And so everybody understands. He said, move it to the cultural battlefield, prime your targets first to have their culture shift so you don't have that level of resistance. A lot of people, I've seen their names in here, they know this stuff already, but that's for people who might not. And so what I did not understand, however, was how central his training in linguistics was for Gramsci. And I've come across some interesting material. You've got, not only do you have Gramsci, and I'm not saying these people work together, but it's sort of this new world opened up. I'm like, you know what? I actually should not be a lazy ass, and I should pay attention to Marxist linguistics. And that brings up the name of this guy, Valentin Nikolaevich. And I don't know how to pronounce this, where the accent should be, but Voloshinov. And he was a Soviet / Russian linguist. And he was basically trying to drag linguistics over into Marxism. And a lot of people who paid attention to the various academic disciplines in the Soviet Union know that it was an overarching imperative that all these various domains of knowledge sort of get themselves right with Marxism so that they could be incorporated into the totalizing worldview that is a post-religious religion, that is a secular materialist, whatever it is a religion, and it has its doctrine, its doxology, whatever the hell those words are. So it opens up this whole idea of the core texts that laid down these basic ideas about language. And, I had heard about this, having studied semiotics quite a bit and having had to look into linguistics as well. I'm no linguist at all, but I've had to read a fair amount into linguistics in order to to sort out, for example, how Saussure said that linguistics should be a discipline that falls under semiotics, whereas people like Barthes came in and said that actually language is the dominant metaphor for all forms of communication, and therefore that's why we call all these things that aren't languages languages, and therefore we have to conceive of a translinguistics that goes above even semiology. Like, that's the core metaphor, which I think is just shite. Given biosemiotics, the stuff out of Tallinn in Estonia, the much more interesting domains, Ükskuld and the rest, they look at how animals communicate. And of course, this idea that it's all fundamentally language falls to pieces, and the anthropocentrism is revealed. But this all is interesting to me because this is how they have made the gains that they have in large part. Banking is another one, but that's not my domain. I'm not going to dip my toe into there'll be an undertow if I try to dip my toe into economics, and I will be tanked because that's outside my wheelhouse. Linguistics, however, is something that I understand a bit about, and I understand communication more broadly, and I've closely tracked what they're doing with communication. And as I started to say, I realized I was derailed. There's this thing that you'll hear about called the Sapir-Wharf hypothesis, and it's kind of wrongly labeled that, but that's the term that all of it goes under these days in modern academic discourse. It's the idea that language really does, in a meaningful way, shape not only how we think, but what we can think. And these days, though the people of that name, Sapir and Wharf, didn't actually push this idea, or it got added to it later. There's an idea of a strong version and a weak version, which just means that people are backing off on their original claims that language absolutely shapes thought. What's interesting about this is it goes much further back, and Gramsci is a major figure in bringing this over as a weapon to the left. Apparently, and I'm still working on this, so, for those of you who might be out there who know quite a bit more about this, and that wouldn't be hard to do, bear with me for doing things like jumping between. Gramsci, I'm reading real material on at present, but I'm filling gaps that lie outside the scope of the text under consideration, since I'm just getting my bearings with the topic and the literature at this point. I'm shoring it up with reference to things like, Wikipedia, where, your mileage may vary. But apparently this goes back to this guy, Wilhelm von Humboldt, who was an 18th century polymath of some kind, philosopher, but he was big into language and had studied Basque and other things, some of the languages of Java. But basically, he has set forth this idea that the structure of a language expresses the inner life and knowledge of its speakers, and that languages must differ from one another in the same way and to the same degree as those who use them. And then he talks about meaning. The meaning that is in the words embodies the thought of a community, and it therefore shapes what they can discuss and what they can't. And, one of the examples that I used back in the day, my friend Tim used it with me, is in English we say love, right? In Greek, certainly ancient Greek, you had eros. Now, of course, many of these words are in English now as borrowings, but hopefully you'll get my point. You got eros, erotic love. You've got philia, brotherly love. You have agape, love without judgment of any kind that's complete, right? Love. They have more words, so it's kind of like the likely spurious thing about how many, Inuit words there are for snow. The idea that without the terminology, that the understanding of the thing does not exist. And that sort of dovetails with the idea of, if you have knowledge of a demon's name, you have power over it. If you cannot name it, you can't deal with it, like we saw in the recent rhetoric surrounding Trump and the 2016 election as regards, whether or not you can call it radical Islamism or, Muslim terrorists or whatever. So going back as far as this guy Humboldt, you have the idea that the language and the people are bound together in ways that shape the very thought of that group. Although the idea goes down to a relationship between the people and their bloodline. So you can think of it as like blood and soil have their correspondence in language, right? certain sounds, certain ways of speaking, certain ways of understanding. But what happens is people like Voloshinov and Gramsci are familiar to some extent with these ideas, and they don't like the idea of it being related in any way to race or to a particular people. They can't have that. That doesn't fit their Marxist framework. So what they have to do is understand the language, and bear in mind all the time that this is the idea that this shapes how people think and what they can say and what they can and can't do. That the language is shaped through the dialectical process across history. And so it emerges out of historical processes, which means you can socially engineer by shaping the succession of historical events. You can socially engineer the mind of a given people. And we see this endlessly going on. But it's very interesting to me to track it back to its origins, rather than just remembering that I saw something about how commies were, bringing up laws about hate speech in the 1950s, or knowing that Gramsci had gone after culture and the Frankfurt School had done so as well. Gramsci went after language as being central to culture and affecting all these different domains, and sort of laying out the Overton window for what can be thought about and discussed. But in a way that very often escapes our awareness, because we're operating with the terms we're given, so to speak. And it's a great irony. A lot of people like to say, God, I hate it too, man. I used to argue with my mother about this because she's an editor and writer. My father was also an editor and writer, but my mother was just the most obnoxious with it. He'd be like, you can't complain about these words, like fucking impactful. All you people who say impactful and morph, and hone in, freaks, all of you. She used to say to me that there's no way you can change that. Language just evolves. She didn't say it, but it's almost as though it progresses, and that progress is ineluctable. Everybody's been taught this crap. And you know what's weird? There's all kinds of words we're not allowed to say. Weird. The same people who tell you there's nothing you can do about these emergent changes in language, because the whole langue versus parole, if we look at the system of language synchronically as an abstraction, it's greater than the sum of its parts, and there's no way a single human being could shape what happens with it. The property is emergent. There's nothing we can do about it. They have hammered down words we're not allowed to say and have been very effective about removing them from our discourse. Weird that, isn't it? Really fucking weird. I said I wasn't going to talk about this forever, so I'll get around to the point here, which is that these guys affected what they have after a series of stunning failures. I mean, the best they could point to at that stage was Stalin, who was busy sort of bringing nationalism back, as I understand it, right? And Trotsky had to slink off somewhere else before he decorated a wall with his insides in Mexico. And what you have there is a situation where they were fucked. I mean, dude's writing from prison. He's screwed. But he's like, how can the slow blade penetrates the shield, How do I deal with this? How do I think my way through this, right? You can have it fast, good, or cheap. Pick any two, right? He's like, well, I don't have the resources right now. Yeah, so what can I do? Well, it won't be fast. Yeah, all right. It's going to be slow. And if I plan it correctly, it'll be enough. And so he comes up with this thinking. And indeed, with support, massive support from elites, this was not grassroots. The thinking, after being processed through people like Marcuse and the rest of the Frankfurt School, this shit worked on us. We did not see it. And it weaponized a successful feature. It exploited a feature of our European collectives, this idea that people should be able to speak their mind. Because, I mean, if you want to compare it to like ancient China, even Tsarist Russia allowed crazy freedom of speech. So even where you would think that, there's no tradition of people being able to speak their mind, Bullshit. Even in the place, even where you would think that that was the case by comparison with many places all around the world, still the ability of a man to speak his thoughts and contribute to knowledge, to ideas, to thought of whatever ostensibly profound kind you like. This was permitted. They weaponized a feature of our system and turned it into a weakness. And they did it via language. Why am I interested in all of this? This is going to be my last little pitch. I am working on this idea of writing that nobody seems to get, or they just don't care, or they don't think it's that interesting. That's fine. I'm going to show you all, man. I'm going to show you all. From a prison in Italy in the 20s, and I guess the early 30s, I can't remember precisely, Gramsci came up with an idea that once worked through by others and with a little bit of support, smashed its way through to where we are now with incredible success. Incredible price associated with it too. I guess that just happens. When you blow gas out there, the wind can catch it and blow it right back on your troops, right? There are problems with all of these, and a cost, it's brought us all down lower, the use of this weapon, a weapon of this kind. But I have been doing quite a bit of study based on this idea that writing precedes speech, and that animals wrote long before humans did. And this comes from out of an insight by a fellow from Oxford who recently passed away in the mid-2000s, late 2000, no, 2012, somewhere in there, 13, 14 maybe, I don't know. Roy Harris, who is a professor of linguistics, and he pointed out that writing is not visual but spatial. And as soon as you realize that writing is spatial, because if it wasn't, Braille wouldn't work, then it becomes very, very easy, if you've already been looking into such things as I was at the time, to recognize that the landscape around you is the first writing surface. And then you start looking at like place, border, and boundary cells, the hippocampus and how it gets used to map space, the way in which animals delineate their territory, how hierarchy is established by marking the environment. You have a situation where you're like, wait a minute, all these things that are primarily of concern to nationalists tie back to older systems of marking that are either non-linguistic or show no necessary relation to spoken language. And this is very, very interesting to me, because the people who have done what they have done to us have done it with our language. And yet they are trapped by their language, whether you construe it as pill pull, or you consider it to be something like Scrabble Babble, or the religions of the book, or even the textual tradition. Now, I remember when I argued with my friend Tim about Aristotelians, the Thomists and the rest of them, Albertus Magnus, Thomas Aquinas, he was like, he called, I remember in a discussion, he was like, Aristotle was just a schoolman. And I was like, what are you talking about? That's totally anachronistic and everything. He said, no, Oliver, he was a schoolman before his time. He was a posthumous thinker, as Nietzsche would say. So we have many different converging textual traditions. Some come out of the religions of the book. Some come out of classical education and rhetoric, where you had to know Greek and Roman, which meant that you were able, in your mind right there, to compare, to see and notice the similarity between two terms and the shift in the semantic field or whatever. Jesus Christ. Fuck it. Fucking AA. Hang on. Where'd this go? Hang on. Share this. This is what I get. And I'm sure I deserve it. I'm going to be going to questions here in a moment. But the basic idea is that we have these traditions where the text is primary, and where these people can't even think outside of a text. How could they? Their materialist dialectics and their need to see everything that is created as a result of this constant rotation, dialectical rotation or inversion, as these things change their positions endlessly across history, and therefore create the language which is the basis of our understanding. You see, what that gives them is they can say our very knowledge and understanding itself is historically conditioned and a product of these, I guess ultimately, Hegelian interactions, turned upside down, I suppose. That gives them, they're so fucking trapped in it. They can't think outside of it. This is so much the case that even when I talk to a bunch of free-thinking right-wing people who can like crack their head open a little bit differently and say, well, allow me to apply synesthesia to this problem, right? Even these people, if you tell them that writing came before speech, they'll be like, fuck you. What are you talking? What? Are you high? They simply, I'm a high elf. They simply they don't get it. And if it's that much with the right, imagine how it is with the left. And yet, resource marks, environmental marks, property marks, you can talk all day long and they say, oh, well, everybody in the world speaks, but not everybody in the world writes. Yeah, it's because of your fucking definition. Because you have asserted through how you defined it that in order for writing to actually be writing, it must represent speech. Which means ab initio that the fucking speech must have come first. But if you dispense with that absurd anthropocentric definition, you'll see that even insects write in their environments, like ants leaving a formic acid trail that gets followed, and it gets used in the same way our writing does, like street signs, to integrate behavior. So I'm sitting here looking at a massive potential that I think corresponds to Gramsci in prison, and that's not taking on airs to imagine that I might be able to compete with some sickly commie in an Italian prison. Though I'm much more stylish. I believe that we have a tool that will steal a march on these motherfuckers, because it's how animals organize themselves. It's how they integrate their behavior. It's how they mark their territory and maintain their control of it. It's how they move between resources and mark their resource caches. It's how dogs pissing at different heights, as so many of you have heard me talk about, at different heights on a tree trunk, indicate their status just like a damn totem pole. Because where the urine hits higher, the animal is physically larger. And you know what's interesting about that? It's not fucking arbitrary. If I patrol the border of my territory regularly, the scent marks are fresh, which means I'm actually there. It's not where I just say it and pretend. It's true. The environmental marking is non-arbitrary and therefore has survival value, because you can make behavioral determinations about things based on it, and they correspond to fact. Not that some animals, and with alamones, some insects, not that they don't engage in deception. That's another very interesting subject. But the point is that this is a tool for behavioral organization that goes all the way back to instincts, to insects, that is instinctive across all these kingdoms of animal life on Earth. And it directly relates to hierarchy, to bloodlines, because we use, for example, non-linguistic brands to mark different groups of cattle that we've bred, right? Or we read the blazes on their foreheads, right? Or we look for certain configurations of horns, or we mark them with ear marks, right? Or we brand slaves, or we raise battle banners that don't have to be linguistic. They can just be signs, right? Just like the old thing with Looney Tunes, where Bugs Bunny is walking along holding up a flag and it has a screw and a ball and it says screwball, right? But even ways where there doesn't have to be a word behind it. All of these symbols and tools get used for military organization, for defense of borders, for establishment of hierarchy, like rank insignia in the military, which is an absolute chain of command. All these things that what I'm talking about get used for are directly related to the concerns of nationalism. On the other side, what you have is language, where it's all like, what do you want it to mean? It's all deception. Is it the right hand or is it the left hand? It's all about arbitrariness. Like I heard D going off about the space or the gap, so to speak, or the relation between the signifier and the signified in Saussure's system. And they hold that the value of any given utterance is always already arbitrary. So we're talking about a tool that kicks anthropocentrism to the side and ties us all the way back through animal life and history. And at the same time, it's associated with defense of borders, hierarchy, bloodlines, military organization, integration of behavior in general, entirely unarbitrary. This is a tool that they can't even see because they're in Scrabble Babble land, and they think that our entire existence is shaped by text and by speech, shaped by language, that we can't escape from it, that if they reprogram us with new words, they'll make, whatever the self-creating new man of the moment is, whether it's a golem or a homunculus. This is out there, and I think it is the weapon of the hour. But of course, everybody's like, what the fuck are you talking about? Writing came before language? Animals write? What are you, crazy? So anyway, these are some things I've been thinking about. And that last bit was not much, but it was a gloss of some key portions of what I had hoped to talk about at the upcoming event. And I hope to be able to talk about it in any case. So yeah, let's take some questions, man. I've been blathering now for quite some time. I've got, 38-ish minutes left to take questions from people. Who's got questions for me? Now I'm going to get around to drinking and asking questions. Let me pull up answering questions. Let me pull up this thingamababa here. Central, let's see what we got here. What are the recent ones? Okay, here are a few. Paula Lynn says, I think I get where Semigog is coming from. Yeah, I hope so. I need to work with other people who can help me to avoid the worst of the autism and help me to be more terse. I recognize my weaknesses as well as my strengths. And I would say both are considerable, if I may say so myself. With a modesty and a superbia, with pride in the same breath as humility. The fallen creature, the fallen man that I am. King Salmonfish says, Semigog, yes, you are correct. I got kicked out of jail with a physical communication of territorial dominance. In my case, it was a Queen of Hearts and a 7 of Clubs. The symbols were secondary. Well, there it is. Make it work with cards, Big Daddy. Central Academic Agency says, do you have entropy? My ability to send super chats was removed. No, because I don't charge for anything yet. So, yeah, you can't send me super chats yet. I'm going to talk to the Persian, and I'm going to sit at his feet and have him patiently explain to me what I need to do to properly sell carpets, because this shit is for the birds. I need to improve my operation. But for now, dear friends, especially all of those of you who have supported the channel over all this time, and a lot of people who used to watch back in the days of Tim and everything, I'm still answering questions for free. So, Fiend J, any collaborations with Gerard coming soon? Gerard just got married, so I think he is he's enjoying a bit of connubial bliss at the moment. And when he comes back from that, yes, there are a few things that we're going to be talking about. And I see something from AM, Apostolic Majesty in the house. Great guy. Definitely recommend his channel. Of course, everybody already knows Academic Agent. Check out his. But he says, would hieroglyphics serve as an example of this? Well, yes and no. See, that's the thing. Any text has communicate. Anybody who's sophisticated about semiotics will know this in general. You've got the idea of the original pictograms that became the basis for that assigning phonetic values with hieroglyphs. But that would not be directly related to the way in which they operate that I'm talking about. So here's a way that it would. If you take a look at fractal typefaces, German black letter, right? And I know you're familiar with this, right? Like Maximilian was big for pushing German blackletter, and the Antiqua typefaces were considered Italianate and from somewhere else. It was from outside our territory. That's not our writing, right? And that was famously taken up by Bismarck, who was like, I will only read books that are done with proper, German fractal characters. Same thing. If you're coming out of a kingdom that does not use hieroglyphs and you come into an area where a standing stone has hieroglyphs all over it, you know that you're in Egyptian territory because it's a place where they can raise a stele and it stays. Likewise, if I'm, I'm a French trooper and I've crossed some marches, and now have come up on a schoolhouse in the midst of the countryside. It doesn't matter whether I can read the hieroglyphs. It doesn't matter whether I can read German. The fact that it's black letter is a territorial mark. So that's what I'm getting at. It's the linguistic value of it isn't important. It's as a territorial marker. And yeah, there are a number of dimensions to that, but perhaps that will serve to at least put a facet on this. Alabaster says, Semiagog, have you heard that there's no proof that Neanderthals had a spoken language? They definitely knew how to draw symbols. Well, yeah, that's interesting. Yeah, this goes into the debate about whether or not they could create sounds, all this stuff about the hyoid bone. But yeah, that would be an angle that could be interesting to throw out there. King Salmonfish said, did you see my comment about how I personally spoke to Michaela partially to address your complaint about Jordan Peterson not seeing the actors beyond the emergence and incompetence? No, I did not. I did not. That's interesting. Killer T Cell says, Semiagog, do you have an example of the right properly using the theory you are voicing? No, because I'm still thinking about how to apply it. The most interesting example I've seen is how territory is marked out with graffiti in urban areas where the territory is being contested. So you have what often gets called broken windows theory, but that's bullshit. It's actually graffiti theory. They talk, well, fix the windows and scrub up the graffiti, and people can tell that the area is under control, but they don't think about what it really is. It's not so much the broken windows, it's the graffiti. Because graffiti is, and particularly an abundance of overlapping graffiti, is like overlapping scent signatures where a piece of ground is contested. And it means that everybody's roaming through it, which means no single party controls it. And that's very interesting to me. There's two guys in the 70s, Ley and Kibruski. They were geographers and involved with maps and things and the rest. And they did a number of surveys of inner city Philadelphia neighborhoods. And they basically plotted the graffiti based on and matched it with the demographics. It's the kind of thing that we could do really well these days with all the tools available. And people just won't do it. Because probably because of what they would see. Also in large part because, again, it falls outside the Scrabble Babble domain of academic discourse, which is always already textual and linguistic. And so what else do we have here? Jado72 says, Semiagog, what is your take on the current Brandon administration as it relates to a weakening U.S. empire? Will China and Russia retake their territories this year? I don't think that China really cares that much about Taiwan. I'm not really sure about that yet. That seems to be a considerable proportion of that is just show. They do want it, but the idea that they have to move fast to do anything about it at this point, I'm not real sure about that. I mean, why? What's the rush? Why does... Just ask yourself reasonably, like AA brought it up on the UO stream about Russia. Why does Russia have to act? I mean, you could easily argue that all the tanks that they've got lined up and the units that they have arrayed on the border, they're there because they expect the U.S. might do something. So, what do they need to invade for? Likewise, if China gets involved in invading Taiwan right now, What do they get? What's the rush? They'll destroy a great deal of the infrastructure, and they'll further agitate everybody in the neighborhood, and they're likely to create a regional war. What do they get? I mean, for that risk, what is their reward? Will they get to sleep better at night, knowing that they've finally taken over this, troublesome group that refuses to bend the knee? What's it worth? Why do they have to do it? And what does Russia have to do to take territory? Donetsk and Luhansk, the Donbass, is already pretty much in their control. What do they have to do? They already took that territory. Ukraine does not control, as far as I know, if somebody's got more recent information, the Ukrainian separatists of Russian descent control those territories right now. And I can't imagine that during all this time, Russia hasn't been doing all kinds of things behind the scene to strengthen their grip there and make it much harder if anybody wanted to move in and do anything there. So, yeah, I don't see, maybe somebody could fuck up, and I've been wrong before. Or, maybe they decide to pull the trigger on it because it serves to direct attention elsewhere when they've got big problems. It's possible, but I'm not really seeing it at present. Ohara Onateek says, would the aposomatism of dyed hair and piercings and T-shirts of crappy modern TV then be a form of writing or semiotics? Well, it certainly falls under semiotics, because that's the idea of anything that can have meaning, anything that can have significance. Writing, yes. The trick with writing is that it's lasting configurations in space. It has to be relatively lasting. It can't be a gesture. It has to be able to stay. And it's best when affixed to territory. In fact, the distinction between what we think of as cattle, chattel, and capital, they all come from the same root. All of them, cattle, chattel, capital, same root. That's movable property. And we can see how very important that was through history, because we've got the distinction of chattel and real estate, which is the territory. Both were marked historically, but that which moves around generally has more to do with property. Though, you're talking about aposomatism, so that's more like animal signaling of threat and this sort of thing with bright colors and the rest. You have to take it on a case-by-case basis. If they've got tattoos that show allegiance or ideological possession or whatever, the hair can do it. Can be. There's a whole bunch of this stuff that begins to overlap in a variety of ways. And it, GSP says, how is Tim these days? Tim has died, I'm sorry to say, if you're asking about Tim here. There is a thing called Press F for Tim, which talks about that. I just went ahead. Let me see here. Apostolic Majesty asks, I'm sorry, I'll get to that AM. I think I just missed a group of them because it advanced. Sabrina C1 asks about Ukraine. I would direct you to JF's channel on Thursday. I'm going to talk to him about that. I'll share my thoughts there. This question from Ohara Onateek about, is semigog a sign language because it lacks some of the distance between signifier and signified, closer to semiotics than spoken language? No, semiotics just means the study or the field. It refers to the domain of anything that can have significance. So semiotics covers spoken language and sign language. It's anything that that can communicate or express meaning. Travis Blaze, to see you, man. It's been a while, and that's my fault because I haven't been streaming a lot lately. Said, so how do we weaponize your ideas to undermine the damage Gramsci has done? Well, I'm working on it. I am working on it. But what I would love to have is help from some right-wing linguists. But you want to talk about going to look for a unicorn. That's like finding 3 lipstick lesbian sisters who like you. But if anybody knows a bunch of right-wing linguists, please let me know. That would be a very interesting thing indeed. Though, of course, my focus is not on linguistics. But that would help because it would open up some... it would be good to talk to people who know this material properly. You know, I mean, hell, I'm still reading. I've got the Managerial Elite, and I've got the Machiavellians. They're on hold because I'm looking at this Gramsci shit. But even not having read them fully, if you're just in a community of people who are regularly talking about the ideas, it advances you so much. So, you know, I know my bits and pieces about Pareto and Mosca because I'm following AA stuff. I'm reading the Burnham, and the other guys are very, very into it. So inherently, you're going to catch inevitably, you're going to catch a few of the little pieces going by and begin to cobble together your own picture of the material just from hearing people who have done the proper work talk about it. And so that's another reason to get some of these other folks involved. But I'm still working on it. It's going to take some time. I need to do my, whatever number of years in an Italian prison like Gramsci did. And this whole COVID nonsense seems to roughly fit the bill. Paula Lynn said, Semigog, is your theory of writing similar to the alchemical idea that phenomena are communications of one sort or another that can be deciphered for use? Well, yes, naturally it falls into that basic idea that anything in your environment can have significance. And if you learn to pay closer attention to it, then it will have survival value for you because it can constitute a warning, for example, or it can make you a better hunter or less likely to get eaten by your prey. And so, there's a whole sequence there with selective pressure. But it's more specific. It definitely relates to territory, to territorial disposition, to resource and environmental marking, and to rank and status. Nullus. Hello, sir. Nullus Abnormocracy says, when are you going to make the Robert E. Howard and H.P. Lovecraft episode? Grug need more Hyperborean glory. Well, it wasn't going to be H.P. Lovecraft. I don't know enough about old Lovecraft. I've only read a few of his stories. But I have talked to Closington and maybe Dave Distributist, and I'm trying to find one or two other proper Robert E. Howard and Conan autists. But it's really, the stream is going to be about Conan, the Barbarian, by God. And I feel like I need a good angle on it. I always want to feel like, at least believe for me, that I have some good new angle on a thing, and I have not yet thought of it yet. So if anybody's got a good angle on that, a way to look at Conan. Conan, tell me, Conan, what is best in life? Apostolic Majesty says, Semigog, are you familiar with the Hereford Mappa Mundi, the Ebstorf map? No, I am not. But I am always ready, sir, to check out anything that you want to put in front of me. Always. So, yeah. Throw it at me, man, and I will check it out. All right, we got a little bit of time left. Let's scroll down here and see what else we got. Roshi Strider says, Semigog, is language, written or spoken or whatnot, the only true social construct? Well, no, because, depending on, what school you're coming from using that terminology, then, any human institution, or even, depending on how foamy-mouthed you are, any beliefs you have about yourself can be a social construct. According to, somebody like these Marxists who've been under discussion, then everything that we think about anything is a social construct. That's sort of the purest vein of utopianism, this idea that everything can be remade, that everything is a tabula rasa. By grasping that everything that we conceive about ourselves and even our modes of conception, that the product of historical processes, that means that historical processes, or whatever the fuck that means, by the way. I mean, what the hell does that mean? I mean, get into what history is itself. Like, as soon as you begin to stress test those words, like, everything crumbles in front of you, and it's just a blubbering nonsense. But God damn it, now I lost my train of thought. It's hell to get old. Yeah, let me find the damn question again. It will remind me. Where did it just go? Social construct. Depending on who you ask, that is that could be anything. So no. Almost certainly anyone that you ask will tell you there are many other examples of social constructs. Zed Dez says, hello Zed, by the way, and thank you for moderating. It is a pleasure to see you as always. Said, I would be so pleased if you would kindly explain the characters in your opening. You talking about those 12 little symbols? That's very, very simple. All it is that if you have 6 dots, there are a limited number of ways that you can connect those dots unicursally, meaning having a line that touches each of them one time, with the sole exception of the one that it returns to at the end and connects the circuit, so to speak. So if you have 6 dots, and sort of in terms of combinatorics, you remove all the permutations that are really just rotations. So you're just looking at what distinct figures you can create with a series of 6 dots, connecting them with a line that touches each point only one time, with the exception of the one that closes the loop. You come up with 12 variations. And so for me, those symbols were interesting because in a very abstract way, you can say, look at how different people construe these same 6 dots, right? You can say we're confronted with 6 dots, but there are these 12 fundamentally different ways to connect them that follow the same rules, which sort of accounts for perspective and a number of other things. And they're reminiscent of sort of, occult diagrams or whatever. But what I like is that they are not in any way. They're just geometric. So yeah, that is the answer. Oh, bunch of F's in chat for Tim. Yes, indeed. If you want to know more about that, there is the previous stream. Yes, King Salmon Fish is asking whether I saw his comments about quietly shit testing weak links. Yes, I did that, and I wish you the best of luck in it. Travis Blaze says, Semigog, do statues fall under your theory as well, especially when signaling territory in regard to the right and left, like tearing down and raising them up? Yeah, absolutely. I met a traveler from an antique land who said 2 vast and trunkless legs of stone stand in the desert. Near them in the sand, half sunk, a shattered visage lies. Yeah, absolutely. Or the Lee statue coming down, or raising all these absurd statues of dictators. Or foamy-mouthed imbeciles like Marx. Yes, because they are landmarks. Landmark. Interesting word, that. Monuments. And yeah, you can tie... Well, basically, if you accept that writing is fundamentally spatial, and it's lasting configurations in space that serve to regulate and integrate behavior, then yeah, buildings literally are writing. I will repeat that for people who will already have thought I'm crazy because I'm saying that, like, wolves write. Buildings are writing. And I've told everybody, I've told AA over and over again, I've told everybody over and over again, especially the people who are up to speed on, postmodern leftist or, just postmodern academic work and the rest, and structuralism and post-structuralism and all that crap. Buildings and Power by Thomas Marcus. The simple fact that everybody seems to care about how we're manipulated and how our behavior is shaped, and they have not read that book. Like, fuck all y'all, man. Fuck all. Well, I shouldn't say that because everybody's got tons of stuff to read, and I benefit from the fact that you're not reading what I'm reading. I rescind my remark. I recant. I love you all. However, read Buildings and Power by Marcus. It's Absolutely fascinating. Really, really important book. And I think I'm going to be talking to somebody about that fairly soon. We'll see. Hopefully a stream will be coming up about that in future. Apostolic Majesty says, Semiagog, thoughts on Umberto Eco? Yeah, he's got one book solidly on semiotics, and I've read a portion of that. I've got his, I think, 6 Walks in the Fictional Woods. He's obviously a very intelligent person. I've also read, I think, an inspiration of his and a mentor of his, if I'm not mistaken, Italo Calvino. I've read some of his stuff too, particularly his work with folk tales. Italian ones too, as I recall. I like him. He's bright. But sometimes, I don't know. He's a little... Yeah, I enjoyed Romance of the Rose. No, not Romance of the Rose. God damn, I've got Mayun, Jean Mayun, and what's his name? The Romance of the Rose from the Middle Ages confused with The Name of the Rose. My memorial chambers are all confused. Umberto Eco is obviously bright and has a lot of interesting things to say. Foucault's Pendulum was good. In terms of his theoretical work, it's deep, but it wasn't exactly in my interest area, so I did not go wandering in it because it'd be a lot of work. All right. Let's just jump ahead. I've already answered a few from Salmon Fish and Travis Blaze, so no offense, gents, but I'm going to jump ahead to other folks I have not yet answered a question with. Okay, Chainsmoke videos are compiled on Odyssey under the name, this is from H. Grimes, under the name Phantom Copy Destroyer channel as a tribute to Tim. I hope that's okay. If not, let me know. Yeah, that's fine. I'll be putting them up there eventually, and there are probably some that you didn't have access to unless you've been saving them from the beginning. But no, that's fine, and thank you. Yeah, Alabaster mentions the business of dogs pissing and it being his dad talking about it as tags, graffiti tags as being like dogs pissing. Yeah, and if you oh hell, this thing just updated and I lost my place. Oh hell. Sorry, this thing auto refreshes and makes me seem even more as though I'm slow. I just have to get back over here. Where the hell? I was on H. Grimes, right? No, I'd moved on to the next one. It was Alabaster, but it had a misspelling in it, so it didn't highlight. Not a question, but he's talking about his dad calling gang tags dogs pissing. And you know, it's interesting. There's some documentaries about graffiti, and they show people who are carrying paint around with them, and they run out of paint. So the dude in this damn documentary, this Hispanic guy, Latino, or whatever the hell you call them, talked about pissing in the can of paint to get more paint out of it. And I was like, yeah, I mean, how much clearer do you want it to be? He's marking his territory with these tags, and he urinates in it so that he's making the marks, scent marks, as well as visible marks. In ethology, they call that advertising the mark. Making it visible as well as something that can be detected by scent. This thing just do an update on me or no? Oh, I'm catching up. Sorry, folks. All right. Nullis is sharing some thoughts on Conan links. Joshua Yarker says, Semiagog, did you hear the Bowden speech on Robert E. Howard? Yeah, I've listened to about half of that now, and I'm going to go back to it again. It's just awesome. I love the fact that Bowden did a speech about Robert E. Howard. Nice. Yeah, so, yeah, I have heard half of that about. As a matter of fact, you reminded me I have to go finish it. Winter says, Semiagog, you may stave off the effects of age a long time, though. At the very least, fasting, it is the most purifying and healing practice. Well, I thank you for that. For the time being, I'm hanging upside down. Meanwhile, to deal with his back problems, AA is going around with a backpack full of books. I'm like, ugh, what are you doing, dude? Anyway, I hope it works for him. Ogun's Iron says, any interest in Olebek? I can't even pronounce that. I'm guessing, is that a type of beer? If it is, I don't know it. Hot damn. Well, it looks like we've gotten through this question, so I'm going to go back to see if there are others. Nullis talking about Dave Martell being a good Robert E. Howard resource. And when I'm going to wrap, 51. I'm going to give it I think I'll take two more questions here real quick, and then I will close with you guys. King Salmonfish, Semigog, you missed my other question about red pilling. Michaela, truth is power, authority, coherence, cures depression, and facilitates action. The romantic tradition saves reproduction. Thoughts? I don't really know where you're going with that, so I would be riffing on something that I don't entirely understand. So no offense, but I will have to pass on that because I can't get traction with it in the small amount of time I have remaining. Travis Blaze says Styx would be a right-wing linguist. A linguist, but I'm not sure I would call him right-wing. I think of Styx as a centrist. No rudeness or offense to him at all. I mean, I had him on a guest here once way back when, and he kindly helped out my channel in the very, very early days of it. So no ill words to him. All right. Do we have any final questions? King Salmonfish closes up. I'll take this to be the last one, and then I will wish you all a very good night. He says, I'm suddenly thinking about writing thing into one's own mind and being, maybe through intense physical initiations. Well, if you're into that sort of thing, go look at Peter Carroll and Ray Sherwin's ideas of chaos magic from the 80s and the late 80s, earliest part of the 90s, and their idea of sigils, which is basically ripped off from Austin Osman Spare. So maybe that'll do something there for you. Ogunzara talking about where I can find right-wing linguists. I hope I can. And if anybody has links for it, or leads for me to go and check out some alleged right-wing linguists, I would appreciate it. So yeah, ladies and gentlemen, buy my books. Science fiction, Vinculum. You can find it on Amazon. And my lovely book of poems. I know we have tons of poetry fans here. Check them out. Thanks again to the gentleman who very kindly sent me a lovely money clip that even had some damn money in it. I should announce what I have coming up here briefly. For right now, all I have scheduled, I think I'm going to be joining Apostolic Majesty on the 7th of February. We'll be talking about a Sultanate of Women. I will certainly only be riding shotgun. AM is a force of nature of his own. I'll just be happy to be there because the conversation is good. We'll be talking about a certain period of Ottoman history, and I believe women taking an outside role in shaping the affairs of men, at least in some respects. And then day after tomorrow, Thursday, I will be talking to JF Garepi about Ukraine. And that will be on his Odyssey channel. And I encourage you guys to follow me on Odyssey, follow JF, and you can also follow JF on Gab and on Telegram, as he is no longer on Twitter. So those are the things coming up. And the last thing I should say is just it's going to be a little bit weird for me for the next little while because I am in the midst of trying to sell my house and move. And what happens is I want to schedule things, and then it looks like something might be going through or it might not. And then I'm like, okay, well, is this contract going to hold up? And these people want to come over on this day suddenly because they want to do an inspection, or I'm planning because I have to go look at a new piece of property. So really what it's doing is it's shooting out sections of my calendar. Like whenever I think I've got something locked in, it comes along and screws up my ability to plan ahead to a certain extent. I'm also talking to Closington and Distributist about doing a thing about Conan. I've got a long delayed clip I would like to do revisiting one of the things in my strategy series with AM. And the strategy series is still around and will continue. So yeah, just please bear with me. I'm going to get this sorted once I am through my transition. Everyone likes to make fun of me for that. I'm going through transition. I will be back and I will be able to focus better. So yeah, in the meantime, if you missed it, you can check me out. I was on a recent stream with AA about the area Rojava and the Kurds and pipelines. There's also one I recently did with Frody, but you'll have to go over to his site. I think it's Guiding the Storm, I want to say. If anybody's interested, just message me directly and I'll get a link for that. But I think it's behind his paywall. It's a very reasonable price. He's doing wisely what a lot of people are doing, which is insulating themselves from, being taken off YouTube and the rest by putting up spots of their own. So yeah, you can check that out too. And again, apologies. Thank you very, very much to all the people who still do support my channel. And for those who are patient with me for not producing content regularly these days, I will attempt to fix all of that very, very soon. So yeah, I will be back as soon as I can with new guests, as soon as I can get them figured out. Wish me luck with moving my house. And yeah, until next time, I am Semigog, and I am